Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're doing a lesson on the Great Depression. Very quick lesson. This should follow up the 1920s. And if you remember from last lesson, the 1920s was often called the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age, the Golden Twenties, because of its opulence, because of its wealth, because it was a party, and people wanted to think in the moment and spend a lot of money now and not care about the future. And times were wonderful. However, all that partying comes to an end in 1929 with the stock market crash, and from then on forward into the 30s, and by the middle of World War II, we have a very long, horrible economy. Usually in the United States, we have recessions, and those last maybe a year or two, but they've never lasted this long, and this is one of the worst that we've ever had. So what is a depression? It's a lot of high unemployment, a lot of people out of jobs, looking for work, can't find any. Business activity is low. Lots of businesses are failing all the time. We're talking in the Great Depression levels of unemployment at about 25%. So 1/4 of people cannot find work that are looking for work in the United States, compared to 2007, where people were looking for work. 10% of them couldn't find jobs. That was 2007 numbers, but these are much, much worse. Again, we've never experienced this before then, and we certainly haven't done after this either. So, horrible economic times. But we'll talk about the causes. We'll get into the causes here. One, stock market crash in 1929 on Black Tuesday. There's a few reasons for why the stock market crashes, and every 7 or 8 years we have a small stock market crash where people sell their stocks wildly. It relates to a small panic, and people, they lose money, but normally it comes back. This one was by far the worst. On Black Tuesday, the stock market lost, after a year, 90% of its total value. Up to $400 billion of value is lost in the stock market. And that freaked people out because we didn't even spend that much altogether on World War I. So that's a lot of money. But here's why the stock market crash thing happens. One, people in the 20s, although they're spending a lot of money, there's also people that save. And most people that are saving money have trusted their financial advisors, and their financial advisors are telling them that the stock market is a foolproof way to save your money, and it's going to increase in value year after year. And in fact, after the last 2 decades, the stock market was doing incredibly well. And even in the mid-20s, it was doing very well as well. Businesses were putting records on profits year after year after year. And even by 1929, you had companies like the Ford Motor Company double its profits in the middle of 1929. So it looked to many people like the stock market was a surefire way to, save for the future, have a steady investment, and make a lot of money. Okay, so that's one reason why the stock market crashes, because people are so confident in it, and it's not that stable of an investment. Okay. Secondly is overproduction. Businesses were in the 1920s developing new methods and new technologies to make things a lot faster, a lot more efficiently, and a lot cheaper. Take Ford Motor Company, for example, again with the assembly line. They're making cars a lot faster. The thing is that these companies don't take into consideration when people will stop wanting all of this stuff. Okay, so they're overproducing. They're producing too many dishwashers, too many radios, too many kitchen appliances, and too many cars. And there's just not enough people out there that want these things after a while. So what you get are these factories that start filling up, storage that starts filling up with cars and dishwashers and whatever else, and no one to buy them. And at that point, companies by 1929 do start posting, for the first time in a decade, losses. And that's confounding to people and many investors. It's a shock, really. And so once that happens, the top investors start to sell their shares, believing they can cut their risks now and not wait until the shares have reached zero, and they make a little bit of money. This creates a panic. Other people follow, and they start selling their shares too. Okay. The last reason the stock market collapses is this. It's called buying on margin. It's a new technique used in the 1920s. where people again were so overconfident in their stock that they thought that even if they didn't have money to invest in the stock market, that they would simply just borrow it. They would go to a broker, borrow thousands of dollars, and then invest that money into the stock market. Now, typically, when you buy a stock, you're only going to lose, you only risk what you buy that stock with. If you invest $1,000 into a stock, you can only lose $1,000. However, if you borrow a couple $1,000s from a broker or a bank and invest that money, well, now if the stock market crashes and that company you invested in also fails, now you owe the broker and the bank lots of money, and you're going to be in debt for a long time. So that made things a heck of a lot worse. Okay, and so what you have is a lot of people way too confident in the stock market, thinking that it's a sure investment and it will never ever go down, which it does. Okay, so this is kind of like going to Las Vegas and taking out a loan of $10,000 and putting it on the table to play blackjack and betting all the money that you have every hand, hoping that you get a 21. And that won't work, just like this didn't work. Okay. Bank failures. Next thing. Bank runs are people that they think that the bank might be running out of their money. And so they, out of fear, run to the bank, and all the bank's customers all run to the bank hoping to withdraw their deposits in time, because back then they don't have what's called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which we have now. Okay, but here's how this works. Banks don't keep all of your deposits on hand in their vault. If you give a bank $10,000 to save, it's not going to keep that $10,000. It's going to take $1,000, keep it in its vault, and the rest it's going to make money off of loans. Loans, loans, loans. It's going to provide them with interest, and that's how banks make money. So they never have all of our money actually in the bank. And banks don't expect all of us to go up to the bank at once and ask for it. So because the stock market crashing was such an overwhelming and crazy concept, people feared that banks would soon collapse. Rumors began starting that banks weren't giving people back their money, and so all the customers of these banks would run up forward again and to the bank, and they'd ask for their deposits back in full. And the bank says, I don't have your money. It's in someone else's mortgage. It's in a car loan. It's in a business loan. They don't have that money with them. So all that they can give them is a few dollars. Say you have $1,000 in your bank deposit, they give you $100 back. And that's about it. So as a result, hundreds of banks go bankrupt across the country. People lose their savings that they've saved all this time. The banks go out of business. Really, it's hard to find a loan now to start a new business or to buy a new home because all the banks are collapsing. So that's another problem too. Next thing, and here's a picture of a bank run inside New York City. It looks pretty hectic. Okay. All right, anyway, reduction in consumption is the third one. During the Great Depression, because so many people were being laid off from work, here's what happened. Let's say people at the Ford Motor Company again, they're laid off from work from their jobs because the stock market crashed and they're posting losses. The company needs to save money. Anyway, 1,000 of those workers get laid off. Those workers used to be buying a bunch of radios. And now that they're laid off, they don't have money to buy those radios. Okay? Now, the radio company then will start to lose money and will consequently have to lay off more workers. And those workers that worked for the radio company may have bought dishwashers. And now the dishwasher company has to lay off workers too. You get where I'm going here. So this is an endless cycle of people who are losing jobs and aren't making money, so they can't spend it, which makes it even worse. Lastly, number 4, the Smoot-Hawley tariff. The government steps in the 30s and tries for a brief time to solve these problems, to make the economy better. One thing that they do is they propose all of these tariffs, and it happens. They put these tariffs into place, and they tax all foreign goods coming to the country so that all the American companies can benefit and do better. This is called protectionism. You're protecting domestic industries. You're making American stuff do better because the foreign stuff has higher prices now with these tariffs. The result, the unintended consequence, is that this makes things worse because these nations overseas retaliate. they put up their own tariffs on all these goods and services, so that when our businesses try to export goods to these countries, they can't. And they lose sales and they lose money. And so this has the opposite effect, and trade dies down amongst the world, and more companies go out of business. Okay, last thing. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, Mother Nature comes in and really kicks us in the face. Okay, so in the 1930s, by this time, Americans are farming out west. They're farming in the Great Plains, and if you picture the Great Plains, it's a bunch of grassland, no trees, it's all flat. And by the 1920s, farming is very mechanized. You have gasoline-powered tractors, you have big combines digging into the soil. And out in the West, you're supposed to farm differently because the soil is only a few inches. The topsoil, the good soil, is only a few inches. It doesn't go down a foot or two like it does in places like Ohio, where the soil is very good. It stays moist for a while. But back then, they really screwed up, and they took these big machines out west, dug in too deep with the tilling, and really carved up that soil, and carved up all that grassland, and the soil couldn't hold its own, couldn't hold itself there, couldn't contain moisture long enough. And as well, they're supposed to put down hay, they're supposed to put down mulch to keep the moisture in there, but they didn't. And in 1930, a huge drought happens. What happened to the soil? Because they over-tilled it, it turns to dust. It turns to sand, and Oklahoma, northern Texas, Nebraska, all those places turn into basically a big desert. Half a million American families lose their farms, lose their homes. Those people are out of work, and they go to California and they try and start picking strawberries out there for little or no money. This is known as the Dust Bowl. Okay, and it takes place throughout the middle of the 1930s, and that's a dust storm right there. Very dangerous stuff. And during these dust storms, on occasion, some of these would go out west, would go out east even to the Midwest, or go out to Chicago or Detroit or Cleveland, and would be in our weather system. And the dust from Oklahoma would go into the clouds, and by the time it was raining or snowing in Cleveland or Detroit, it would rain down dirt. The dust storm would pick up into these cities, and the next morning you'd step into a foot of dirt lying in the city out of nowhere. Occasionally you'd have black snow during the wintertime, where the dust would get up into these clouds and pour down this black ash-like stuff, kind of like there was a volcano outside of the city. So pretty rough stuff. In brief, those are the causes of the Great Depression. We'll get more on how we solve this problem next week when we cover Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a new president who comes into office and tries to help all this stuff out.